Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are talking about sewing rules you should never ever ignore. Now I've got a little bit of a twist for you on this one because I went into my community post and posed the question to you guys and I got a number of responses. So what I'm going to do is read out those responses and then we can have a little discussion. So the first response is from Lorraine and she says, "Take your time, patience is a virtue." I have yet to learn this rule. Yeah, you and me both, Lorraine. It's a really good one actually, taking your time. I know when I first started to sew, I was in some kind of hurry. I don't know why. I was in a hurry to sew. If I could make a dress or a top in a couple of hours, I considered that a win. Like, it would boost my ego if I could get a top, a dress in a day, a top in an hour, which in the beginning I could never do. But it was like, yes, I felt really good about myself if I could do that. It didn't matter how many mistakes I'd made. It didn't matter if my seams were wonky, I had threads hanging out. I got a top done in an hour. Wow. I am an amazing sewer. No, no, no. That is not how it works. Particularly when you're first sewing, I would say, you really do need to take your time because you're learning the skills of sewing. You are still learning to sew in a straight line, perhaps. You are still learning your machine, the ins and outs of your machine. It's all good and well knowing how to sew. But if you've got a machine that is dodgy, and I had one or two dodgy machines in my time, then you'll have struggles and you still won't be able to do it in a timely manner. And all that's going to happen if you try to rush yourself is you're going to get frustrated and then you're going to make more mistakes. And then probably at the end, with all the mistakes that took twice as long as you were hoping it was going to take, and you are going to feel like a failure. And it's completely unnecessary. On YouTube, there is this idea that we have to sew in everything in an hour. But those things are not really for you, the viewer. They are for the content creator to get the clicks. On YouTube, we are a numbers thing. We are in it for the numbers. Anything that saves time or money on YouTube will get the click. And so that's what's happening. And I don't think anyone who sews would really recommend that you sew a top in an hour just to sew it in an hour. So the next one is from someone called Paraboo. And they say measure twice, cut once. And I've got the way too expensive fabric pieces without seam allowances to prove it. You cannot cut it twice, can you? How many times have we measured not only the fabric and the pattern pieces, but our own bodies as well? And then we've gone ahead and cut it and it doesn't fit. We've all done it. I know we've done it. I've done it. And I'm sure you've done it as well. And that's usually going back to the last point when we're in a rush, isn't it? I would say particularly when you're doing your body measurements, do measure twice. Measure over a few days as well if you can. It's all good and well. You're just about to start your project. You know which size you need to cut. So you think, I'll get the tape measure out and I'll measure myself. And you do a quick measurement. We all know, especially us women, we bloat, don't we? It really depends on the time of the month if you are premenopausal. It also depends on fluid retention, any like health conditions you might have, time of the day. There's so many things that go into the size we are. And also, not only the size we are, we have to think about when we're going to wear these clothes. If we measure when we're at our smallest and then we're going to wear our clothes when we're bloated, it's still not going to fit. So those are things to consider. Always, always, always measure twice, no matter what it is, whether it's your body, the pattern pieces, because we're human and we make mistakes. And if, like this person talked about, you're using a really piece of expensive fabric, if you measure once and cut once and get it wrong, you're going to have tears. You really, really are, especially if you can't source any more of that fabric. So the next one's do not put pins in your mouth. Close rotary cutter after every cut. Stop and adjust, and don't sew when you're tired. I am the biggest fiend of this rule, and I break it all the time, holding my hand up here. It's almost automatic. I'm sewing on the sewing machine. I'm in my own world. I need to take a pin out, know where to pull it, in the mouth, why not? Or even if I'm putting pins in when I'm putting the fabric pieces together, I'm still in my own world and it's just going in my mouth. Thankfully, I haven't had any problems whatsoever, haven't swallowed any pins, but I could see, imagine if I was startled, it could go down quite easily. And then you're going to have real problems if you've got a pin inside your body. So you've got to be so careful with safety. Sewing is a dangerous sport, is it not? So we have to be super careful. The next one from Linda Williamson says press, press, press. When I was first sewing, I was quite lazy with my sewing and I wasn't really pressing until the end of the garment. I wouldn't even press the fabric before I cut it out, so it would have wrinkles in it, so I wasn't cutting it correctly and it just looks apart. It really did not look good. So I really advocate now for pressing as you go. There are people who say sew a seam, press a seam, sew a seam, press a seam. Ain't got no time for that. I'm still a little bit lazy. No time for that whatsoever. But what I will do is sew 2 or 3 lines of stitching up until I'm crossing a seam, and then I'll stop and then I will press, and then I will sew across seams until I sew across another seam, and then I'll press again. So I am pressing throughout the project, but just not at every single line of stitching, because I think we've got to work smarter, not harder. And then you give it a final press at the end. You've been pressing your seams open, so the seams are laying beautifully. Pressing also sets in the stitches, which is going to make your garment more secure over time. And at the end, you are going to look like you've got a professional piece of clothing. Kev Allen says pre-shrink your fabric. This is so important. And this is something that I learned the hard way. One time I bought some fabric off eBay. I didn't pre-shrink it. I didn't do anything with it apart from cut it out and sew it. Went in the wash, come out the wash, and it was 2 sizes smaller. What a waste of time, effort and money has happened, has gone into that, because it never fitted me again. Maybe if I still had it now, it would fit me, but I didn't, and I didn't keep it. So pre-shrinking is basically when you wash the fabric and dry the fabric as you would once you'd made the clothes, and then any shrinkage will happen. And so then when you cut your pieces out, you will have the right size pieces. But it's not just about sizing and shrinkage. Pre-washing your fabric is going to get rid of chemicals, bacteria, debris that has been accumulating on fabric. Textiles tends to attract anything and everything to it. Legal Eagle, which is my sister, Iggy, we call her, she says never take your eye off the needle. Now, the reason she's saying this is because many years ago, I sewed straight through my finger. I was sewing at the sewing machine. I turned to look at the TV that was behind me, and I felt something on my finger. It wasn't even painful particularly. It was just like, maybe like I jammed my finger. That's what it felt like. Turned back and I've got a needle through my finger, through the bone. And I sat there and thought, shit, what do I do now? I was on my own. I was like, rang 111, which is our non-emergency health line. And they said, go to hospital straight away. So I went to hospital and they had to pull it out with gas and air. The oldest video on my channel, I've just come out of the hospital and I'm sat outside the hospital filming a piece to camera about it, and I'm totally in shock still. Do not take your eye off the needle. It is so dangerous. I straighten my hair for videos, And through the course of the first video, my hair ends up going wavy again. It drives me mad. I prefer it straight. Morgan J says, do not sew over pins. Now this is a controversy. Some people say it doesn't matter. Some people say it does. I think it does because you're going to damage your machine. Much earlier in my sewing career, I did used to sew over pins quite regularly. But as I became more mindful and more conscious of what I was doing and wanting to become a better sewer, I stopped doing that. And I always stop the machine, take the pin out, carry on now. It serves as a slower process, but we've already talked about the fact that we do not need to rush. So what can happen if you do sew over pins and you happen to hit a pin is, best case scenario, you snap your needle and you have to put a new needle in. But you could also snag the fabric, you could misalign your sewing machine, and that could be really, really expensive to fix. I've had a misaligned sewing machine before, and getting it fixed was more expensive than the cost of the machine at the time. It was just a cheap machine. You could also hit the pin, the needle snaps off and goes in your eye, and then you're in hospital half blind. So it just really is not worth it. As much as it's faster and you might think that it's not going to be dangerous, nothing's going to happen. It could do. If you really want to sew fast and you want the pins in, baste your seams before you sew, and then you can take your pins out and just have the basting thread and then pull that out afterwards. Kathleen Green says, sew with the correct seam allowance. Now I'm on the fence about this one. See, when you sew with the aim of using the correct seam allowance. There would be no reason not to. I sew with patterns, so I would tend to go with the 5/8. But sometimes I don't agree with their seam allowances. For example, if they tell you to do 5/8 around here, that's unnecessary. You only need 3/8. But I would cut the fabric according to how I wanted to cut the seam allowance or sew the seam allowance. If you do not sew with the correct seam allowance, then you're not going to have the correct size, because when you measure your size and you've got a pattern and you cut it out, they add on the seam allowance that they tell you to use. So say that they say use a 5/8 seam allowance and I used a 3/8 or a 2/8. 2/8 is a quarter. Or a quarter or even less, then my garment is going to be quite a bit bigger than I thought it was going to be, and it won't fit me. As a plus size sewer, I sometimes found these 5/8 seam allowances, which is huge, really helpful, because there were patterns that I had purchased that I did not fit into, or I was just outside the largest size. So what I would do is sew a smaller seam allowance. Even though they might have said a 5/8, I'd sew like a quarter, and then I'd get a whole other size up. So that can be a little hack if you are plus size and you want to sew. So if you're liking this video so far, do hit subscribe and comment down below, because that will help my video grow. Very soon I will be moving, and then we will get back into sewing once I'm settled in. Hit subscribe, comment, like, do all the things. Share this video with anyone that you feel would benefit from it. So they were all the comments that I got from people regarding this topic, but I've got a couple of my own to add to the mix, the conversation, the debate, if you like. My first one is to use the appropriate scissors for the project. This is a rule that you really shouldn't break, because paper will blunt your scissors. So if you are cutting out your own patterns, or cutting out the size that you need on your pattern, or even putting patterns together and then cutting them out, you should have a pair of paper scissors. Household scissors are fine for this, and you can just use those. But when you come to cut your fabric out, whatever you do, do not use those same scissors, because the fabric will be damaged, because the scissors will be blunt, it will snag the fabric. Whereas if you have a pair of fabric scissors that are dedicated just for fabric, and I would recommend that you hide them from your loved ones because they will not respect your boundaries on this, or even just label them. But have a pair of scissors that you have bought specifically for dressmaking and only use those on fabric. The fabric will cut beautifully, it will cut accurately. You will have a much easier time, especially if you're someone who suffers with your hands, which I do sometimes. Then you don't want scissors where you're going like this on the same bit of fabric to try and get it to cut. The next one that I've got for you is one that I don't hear many content creators talking about. And that is when you're sewing, do not pull the fabric through. So I know when I was first sewing, I would have this habit. So here's the needle here, here's my hand guiding the fabric through, and then I would be pulling it through at the back. And I don't know why I got into that habit. Maybe it was with a machine that struggled with thick fabric, something like that. I got into this habit, but what you're doing is you're stretching the fabric out, and then the seam becomes longer. And sometimes I had like an inch longer on one seam, so maybe the front seam that joins the back seam, but they didn't match up because I was stretching it out, and it becomes baggy as well, ripples. Just let the machine do the job that it's designed to do. You can guide it through at the front. If you do have trouble with fabric evenly going through, because don't forget you've got like a feed dog down the bottom which drags it through, but you don't have a feed dog on the top. So what you might do is have fabric, the two pieces of fabric that don't go through evenly. If you find that is happening, then what you can do is get, oh, what's it called, a magic foot? What's it called? No, it's not called a magic foot. Magic foot? We're going to call it a magic foot. I will put on screen what it's called. If it's not I'm pretty sure it's not called a magic foot, because that's got feed dogs at the top and bottom, and that will drag your fabric through really evenly. They are generally for jersey fabrics, but I've used mine on woven as well. It's absolutely fine. This one is super, 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 super important. Choose your size by your measurements, not your ready to wear size. This is a topic that has come up time and time again on my channel. I have so many people over the years that have commented really upset because they might be a size 12 in real life and they're a size 20 on here. You've got to forget all that. You've got to forget all that. If you're a size 12, don't go sewing a size 12 on your thingy, on your pattern, without measuring yourself. The only thing you should be concerned about is your measurements. Now, I understand this can be quite confronting. It can be quite daunting to have to take your actual body measurements. I remember the very first time I did this, I was very big and I took my measurements, and then I looked on my measurements. I looked on the pattern and my measurements were way over the biggest size, and I wasn't ready to confront the issues around my obesity. So it can be very, very confronting. There is no point sewing a top or a dress or whatever it is in a size that is not going to fit you, or at best be really tight, because you are going to look slimmer if you have a piece of clothing that fits you properly, rather than you're just fitting into it because it's a specific size. Forget any issues you've got around sizing or any identity crises that you might have because you are a size 12, not a size 18. Don't worry about it. It's just a number. And no one else is going to know when you're wearing that garment what size you've made it in. Measure yourself twice before you cut your pattern out, because that will save your self-esteem so much. I hope you enjoyed this video and you got some benefit from it. Do leave me a comment. Let me know which is a sewing rule you think that should never be ignored. We can all learn from each other. Check out this video and I will catch you in the very next one. Bye for now.